Stafford's number one with 21 touchdown passes. Right now, Justin Herbert 18, and then Patrick Mahomes, along with 4 other players, have 17. Welcome to Just the Stats, NFL Top 10's for Thursday. My name's Ernie Jennings. I'm your host. And today we'll look at some of the season numbers. Who's leading the NFL passing, running, receiving, yards from scrimmage. We'll look at all those. But first, we're going to take a look at the top 10 teams through week 9. This is my version of the top 10 teams. Obviously, it'll vary with different people. I was looking at somebody's online, and I actually found it amazing. A couple of the teams they had in there that I do not have, but we'll look at that. So that's what we'll do today. Let's see. Today is Thursday. Since it is top 10s for Thursday, we'll do that today. And we do have a Thursday night game, so that'll be good. It's always good to get back into football weekend. So I'm looking forward to the Thursday night game, see how that game goes. But like I said, first we're going to start off with my top 10 teams. Now, last week, I had the Indianapolis Colts as number 1 based on the fact that they were the only team with 1 loss. Now, they hadn't beaten a lot of good teams. The bad teams they've beaten handily, and they still have the highest point differential in the NFL. But, they lost to the Steelers, so had to bump them down. So my team, number 1 team, and this is really always hard, but Philadelphia Eagles, I got as number 1. They're 6-2. The top 8 teams all have 2 losses. So, there's nobody with 1 loss anymore. The last one was the Colts. So now the best teams all have 2 losses. Now the Eagles, I put as number 1, primarily based on they've already beaten 2 teams on this list who are in the top 10. And 4 of their wins have come against teams with 500 or better records. No other team on this list has that kind of a qualification. I think most teams have beaten at best 2. There might be one that beat somebody who's 500 or so, but most of the teams on this list, their wins are coming against teams with losing records. And so you kind of have to factor that in there. But the Eagles have had one of the more difficult schedules so far this year, and yet they are 6-2. And like I said, they've beaten 2 of the top 10 teams on this list. So Eagles, number 1. Number 2, Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I've been impressed with them. They also have beaten 2 teams on my list. That is the Seattle Seahawks and the San Francisco 49ers. So they've been impressive, and I think they've been doing it with an offense that's been hindered. And if they can get all their players back, all their wide receivers back, Bucky Irving back, this could be a very formidable team. They're still seeming to win. Baker Mayfield pulls some games out, and it's been pretty impressive. So I've got them at number 2, 6-2, as well as the Eagles are both 6-2. Now I have the Denver Broncos at 7-2 as my number 3 team. This is where it really gets a little bit difficult because a lot of these teams, when you look at who they've beaten, they haven't beaten stellar teams necessarily. Some have, but the Denver Broncos did beat the Eagles. So I put them at number 3. They're also on a 6-game winning streak. So they've been good. Now, I don't know how many times, and, the Buccaneers were doing this too until it stopped drastically, but you can't keep coming from behind all the time as the Broncos have the last 2 out of 3 weeks. But they have such a good defense, and as their offense continues to improve, I look at them as one of the better teams. And I do think teams with a good defense, if you're talking about teams that are going to make it to the Super Bowl, you have to have a defense that's halfway decent at worst. You really need a pretty good defense. Now, number 4, Seattle Seahawks. They're 6-2. I've got them at 6-2. I got them ahead of the Rams, who I have at 5th. They're also 6-2. And honestly, I sort of think the Rams are better than the Seahawks, but the Seahawks beat the Rams already once. So I got to keep them where they are at this point in time. Seattle Seahawks just picked up Shaheed, another wide receiver, so that's going to help them on their offense. Sam Darnold has looked really good this year. And so with the running game, they have a couple of good running backs. And now with the best wide receiver right now in the NFL, Jackson Smith-Njigba, and then you add Shaheed. And when Cooper Kupp gets back healthy again, they've got a pretty decent offense, really good offense, and they have a good defense. So they're another team that could look really impressive as we go later and later into the year. And like I said, I have the Rams at number 5. They're also 6-2. I really want to place them higher. Matthew Stafford, to me, has been so impressive. Their offense is incredible when Stafford wants it to be. And their defense is also equally good. So they're, to me, right there with the Seahawks. But I'm placing them just as they are in the division, with Seahawks number 1 and the Rams are second place right now in the division. So I placed them that same way in my top 10. All right, so now, I should say this about the Rams. There's a big game this weekend with the Rams and the 49ers, who also are on my list. So that's going to go a long way to seeing how good the Rams are and if they can beat the 49ers. When we get to the 49ers, we'll talk more about them. So that'll be a big game this weekend for the Rams. Now, number 6, Indianapolis Colts at 7-2. I know they lost to the Steelers, but, every team on this list has had some bad games. Teams you wouldn't have thought they lost to would lose to, but they did. And this was only their second loss, and everything went wrong. This was Daniel Jones' worst game by far. So is this just a fluky kind of game where they just weren't quite ready to take on the Steelers? I think they had 6 turnovers. I know Daniel Jones had 3 interceptions. I believe he also might have had 2 fumbles. So he was just horrible. And yet they lost 27-20. So that many turnovers, and they lost by a touchdown. So I'm going to say that part of it is they're not as good as number 1 maybe at this point in time, but they're not the worst team either. They're still a good team. And I'm going to leave them at this level at number 6 right now because they just picked up Sauce Gardner for their defense, one of the best defenders in the NFL. You can count him up in the top 3 or 4 at worst 3 or 4. That is going to really help their defense. And they've already got the best offense in the NFL at this point in time. Now you throw Sauce Gardner in there on defense, and that's impressive. And for the Colts, unlike a lot of teams on this list, the Colts have only lost to the Steelers and the Rams, 2 teams with winning records. And like I said, the Rams, I have 1 spot ahead of the Colts. So their losses haven't been to fluky teams. And the teams that aren't good, they've been dominating. So I'm going to put them at number 6. I dropped them from 1 to 6. Now, number 7 is the New England Patriots. Believe it or not, as I put this list together, first I had them up there like number 3 or so. And then as I went along and I looked at their record and so forth, I kept bumping them down. This is the same thing I did with Buffalo last week when I didn't even have them in the top 10 because I kept looking at their record, even though they were, 5-2 at the time. And I kept thinking, well, who did they beat? They haven't beaten anybody with a winning record. And ultimately I bumped them all the way off the list. Well, this time I started doing that with New England, but I stopped at number 7 for New England Patriots. They're 7-2. I think they're on a long game winning streak, maybe 6 as well. I think it is 6-game winning streak for them. Like I said, they beat the Buffalo Bills already this season. That's their big win. Now for the Patriots, we're going to see how good they are because they are playing the number 2 team on my list, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. That's a big game. So we got 2 games this weekend with teams in my top 10, the Rams versus the 49ers and the Patriots versus the Buccaneers. So after this Sunday, we'll see which of those 4 teams is really deserving to be in the top 10 and who's not. It really will depend on, even if you lose in this game coming up, it will depend on how badly a team loses. But those are going to be some really good games right there. Now, number 7, and I can't put them ahead of the New England Patriots, though when I looked at a couple of these top 10 lists, they have the Buffalo Bills as high as number 2. I think it's just Josh Allen on their mind, but it's been clear that teams this year might have a better handle on how to deal with Josh Allen. Because if you can deal with him, that pretty much leaves only Cook you have to worry about. And he is good, obviously. But I put the Buffalo Bills at number 8, right behind the Patriots, because like I said, the Patriots beat the Bills. So until something changes, I don't see how I can put the Bills ahead of the Patriots. Now, that could change. If the Patriots lose to the Buccaneers, then obviously, and the Bills win, then that would make a change. But the Bills did come through. They beat Kansas City, and I think they beat them pretty handily. Not easily necessarily, but they seemed to have that game under control pretty much the whole way. And so they jumped on my top 10, and they're at number 8, 6-2. Now, number 9, this is where it got a little difficult because every team on the list, like I said, so far had 2 losses. San Francisco 49ers, I have at number 9. They're 6-3. Now, I put them on this list because they have beaten the Seahawks, the Rams, and the Jaguars. Jaguars are not on my top 10, but they do have a winning record. But they did beat 2 teams with only 2 losses, 2 teams on this list. So I think, that's impressive. They're one of the teams that have beaten some really good teams. So they're at number 9. Now, number 10 was very difficult, and I kept going back and forth with different teams. I put the Detroit Lions at number 10. They're 5-3. They have beaten Tampa Bay. That was one of their bigger wins. Who is on this top 10 list? They're number 2. They're 5-3. It was a tough call to see who it could have been. But I ended up finally doing the Detroit Lions at 5-3 at number 10. Now, the 2 teams that dropped out were Green Bay and Kansas City. Green Bay actually has a better record than Detroit Lions, and they're ahead of them in their division. But I don't know what's up with the Green Bay Packers. How do you lose? First of all, they tied to the Dallas Cowboys, and they lost to the Cleveland Browns and the Carolina Panthers. How is that possible for a team that's supposed to be what I initially thought going into the year, one of the teams who had a chance to go to the Super Bowl? You just can't lose to teams like that or even tie the Dallas Cowboys. That's just not good. So I could not put them in my top 10 with those types of losses. Lions have 3 losses, but they're not to teams like that. So I just ended up dropping them out of the top 10. And then Kansas City was the other team, Kansas City Chiefs. I can't have them in the top 10. They're 5-4. The main reason I can't have them in the top 10 is, how do you put a team in the top 10 that if the playoffs were to start today, they would not be in the playoffs? So if you're not even in the playoffs, you can't be in the top 10. I don't care how good everybody says you are. You're not top 10 until you can at least say, yes, if the season ends, my team's in the playoffs. All right, so that's a look at my top 10 teams after week 9. And obviously this is going to change next week. We'll see what happens. A couple of big games. And any one of these top 10 teams could be upset as well. There's been plenty of upsets this year, just like the Green Bay Packers losing to the Carolina Panthers, despite the fact that they're 2 touchdown favorites. That's just That to me was right there. You're off the top 10. You can't lose to a team like that in Green Bay, nonetheless. So that's horrible. All right, we'll stop with that and we'll move on to looking at some of our season leaders here. Start with the passing yards. Daniel Jones leads the NFL right now in passing yards with 2,404, just ahead of Justin Herbert, who was number one going into this past week, and he ended up only 14 yards behind Jones with 2,390. Now, let me adjust this just a tad. There we go. Jones, I was looking at this right now, is on a pace to be within the top 10 of the Indianapolis Colts all-time top 10 passing yards in a single season. So we'll start looking at that and see how well he does as the season continues. And I'll look at a lot of these players that have decent numbers and see if any of them are going to be in the top 10 for their team all time, like on a season level. So we'll see what happens there. But Daniel Jones right now is on a pretty good pace for the Indianapolis Colts as far as that goes. Like I said, Justin Herbert's second, Patrick Mahomes third, 2,349 yards. And then the only one over 2,300 yards is Dak Prescott for the Cowboys with 2,319. That's it. In fact, you got Drake May just under 2,300, and then nobody even over 2,150 after that. Now, that's because Matthew Stafford, who has almost 2,150 yards, has played one less game. So when he gets his ninth game in, he should be right up here near the top as well. It could be at the very top, in fact. Right now, Matthew Stafford has been so impressive, and I'll show you why. Because right now, despite the fact that he's played one less game than a lot of these teams on this list, he leads the NFL in touchdowns with 21. 21 touchdown passes already in this season. Now, that's not on a record pace, because that'd be 50 or more, but it might be in a pace to get into the top 10. 21, you double that, 42, and then add a few more maybe. But he's well ahead of Justin Herbert, who has 18. Yeah, Matthew Stafford had 4 more last week. So that's one of the reasons when we get to Adams, his wide receiver, that's why he's leading in touchdown receptions. But yeah, Stafford's number one with 21 touchdown passes. Right now, Justin Herbert 18, and then Patrick Mahomes, along with 4 other players, have 17. So a little bit of a drop-off after Matthew Stafford as far as those touchdown passes go. All right. Next up, interceptions, a negative category. And this is Geno Smith and Tua Tagovailoa. Geno Smith had a pretty good game last week. He did have 1 interception. Otherwise, he had a good game passing. They ended up losing, but, he just threw the ball over and over and over to Brock Bowers, which just boosted his numbers. I think he had 3 touchdown passes in that game, so that was good. A decent game for him compared to some of his others. But Smith and Tagovailoa both have 11 interceptions so far, which is 3 more than anybody else on this list. And one of those is Jake Browning, who has 8, who's not even playing quarterback at the moment. Joe Flacco's also tied for 3rd with 8, and Justin Herbert has 8 as well. Now, Flacco came into the week with 6, and he had 2. And as I mentioned in previous podcasts, one of them came at the very end of the game in a Hail Mary that he was trying to get to try to win the game against the Bears, and it just didn't pan out. Got intercepted. But those are your top 5. After that, it's dropped down to only 6. Everybody else has 6 or less. So got Smith and Tagovailoa leading in the bad category of interceptions with 11 apiece. Now, last category for the quarterbacks is that sacks, as Cam Ward continues to rack up the sacks. He had 4 more this time, and he's been sacked now 38 times. Drake May is trying to make an effort to catch him, which is not good. Drake May has 34. This has been back-to-back weeks where he's had 6 times he was sacked in the game. I don't know. You can't have that keep happening. They're the only 2 over 30 times being sacked. Cam Ward and Drake May, if he doesn't slow down, will also be on a pace to set an NFL record. Cam Ward is definitely on pace to set the NFL record. Hopefully he doesn't do it, because it doesn't do anything for your confidence or your body to be sacked 70 times, which is where he's headed, or even more maybe. But those are your top 2. Justin Herbert comes in at 3rd with 28. Like I said, only those 2 players have more than 30. And there's only 7 players that have more than 20. So Trevor Lawrence had not been on the list. He jumped all the way up to 6th because he had back-to-back weeks where he was sacked 7 times. That's 14 in 2 games. And then in the other 6 games, he's been sacked 7 times. So they got back to that last week against the Raiders, where Trevor Lawrence was only sacked 1 time in the game. So that's more what you want to see from that offensive line. And Trevor Lawrence, I think his problem was the just hanging on to the ball. I think he got rid of it a little bit better. They had the bye week to look at that, and he improved over those previous 2 weeks. All right, let's move on to the running backs. Now, this was all Jonathan Taylor until last week, when Jonathan Taylor only racked up 45 yards in that loss to the Steelers. They really shut him down pretty well. No touchdowns, only 45 yards rushing. They were playing from behind, so that also hindered Taylor, which then gave James Cook the opportunity to gain some ground on him, because James Cook had 114 yards, so quite a bit more yards. So now Jonathan Taylor has 895 yards. James Cook has 867 yards. But James Cook has played 1 less game. So honestly, James Cook is the only player right now who is averaging more than 100 yards a game rushing. Jonathan Taylor is 5 yards short of that, so he's very close. And all he needs is, like, next week to have a game where he has at least 105 yards, and he's back on pace. But those 2 running backs, like I said, Taylor with 895 yards and Cook with 867 yards, are the only 2 players over 750 yards. Huge lead over everybody else. There's 2 more running backs with 700-plus yards. That's Rico Dowdle and Javonte Williams for the Cowboys, 716 for him, and Dowdle for the Panthers, 735. Now, Dowdle, it's interesting, played for the Cowboys last year, and they decided not to keep him. And he filled in for Hubbard, did so well, had a 200-yard game, 200-plus yard game, and another game where he had 180-something yards. And then they benched him when Hubbard came back for 2 weeks, and they realized Dowdle's just too much better than Hubbard to be on the bench. And so they got Dowdle starting again. And immediately he put up 130 yards this last Sunday. So he's 3rd now. So he's 3rd based on the fact that he didn't start the season. And then he was not benched, but he was 2nd string running back for a couple of weeks after he came onto the field. So if he continues at that pace, and the Panthers are going to run it a lot, they try to run it every chance they get and limit the passing of Bryce Young as much as possible. Dowdle has a good chance of, possibly catching these other 2 players, though Jonathan Taylor has been very impressive with that team. The Colts against the Steelers just got completely out of their game script. It was their worst game of the season all around. So I expect to see Jonathan Taylor back up with a better game this next weekend. So after those 2, then the next one, J.K. Dobbins has 695. A big drop down to Derrick Henry with 629, and then farther down the list. Now, you can see everybody on this list, on every list that I'm going to post on YouTube at Just the Stats NFL. You can see everybody. I'll have all these lists up while I'm talking. If you watch the podcast, you'll see the top 10s that I'm posting on all these different categories. So that's one thing you'll be able to do. And it saves you from just seeing my face up there. My face is real small down in the corner versus taking up the whole screen. So much better way to watch a podcast. So those are your leaders in yards. I will mention McCaffrey's on the top 10 rushing at number 9 with 596 yards. I'll mention that because he'll come up tomorrow when I talk about some more of these categories. Now, rushing touchdowns. Jonathan Taylor still leads on this category by a couple of touchdowns. He's got 12. Like I said, he didn't get any this week, so he still has 12 on the season. Josh Jacobs is second. Josh Jacobs for the Packers has 10. He had 1 this past week, so now he has 10, so he's 2 behind. And then 2 behind that, Javonte Williams has 8 for the Cowboys. Those are your top 3 players, so 12, 10, and 8. And then there's a drop down to a couple players with 7 and a couple more with 6, and then a bunch of players with 5. But the two of the players last year, let me think. James Cook and Derrick Henry both had 16. They were 2 players that led the NFL in rushing touchdowns last year. This year so far, Cook has 7 and Derrick Henry has 6. So they're not on the same pace they were last year, while Jonathan Taylor's on an incredibly strong pace, even though he didn't have a touchdown this week. Now, at number 4 and number 5 are 2 Buffalo Bills, James Cook and Josh Allen. James Cook did not have any touchdown rushes this past week, but Josh Allen had 2. So now they both have 7 rushing touchdowns, which is probably one of the things that's going to hinder Cook as far as him moving up this list. And that's the same problem Taylor has, actually, because Daniel Jones did have a rushing touchdown, which could have easily just went to Jonathan Taylor, but Daniel Jones ran it in himself. So that does slow down Taylor. He'd even have more if they didn't have Daniels running him in. All right. Now, one more category, and we'll call it a day. Top 10 season leaders rushing yards by quarterbacks. Justin Herbert's only player over 300 rushing yards. He's got 305. Justin Fields, who didn't play last week, has 288. Those are your top 2. Patrick Mahomes is just behind Fields with 285, and Josh Allen has 280. Those are your top 4 players right now. Drake Mays, number 5. Daniels for the Commanders is number 6. He comes back for 1 game. He's hurt. He's probably out for maybe the season, but for several weeks at a minimum. And if they can't make the playoffs, who knows if he even comes back. So even though he's number 6 right now, ultimately he'll probably end up not even on the list by the end of the year. We'll have to see. But right now it's Justin Herbert's been rushing quite well. Jackson Dart's the one to watch. He's number 7 right now with 251 yards. But he had 56 yards this past week. And he's been averaging quite a bit of yards every game. So if he keeps averaging 50 a pop, he'll be moving up the list quite speedily. I mean, no one else is really running for that many yards every game. So we'll see what happens. Now, Herbert did last week. He had 57 yards, just a yard more than Dart. But normally you don't see many yards rushed, too many. Mahomes only had 5, in fact, last week. And Josh Allen, even though he had 2 rushing touchdowns, he only had 19 rushing yards. So those are your leaders as far as quarterbacks go. Justin Herbert with 305. All right, that's a look at some of the season leaders as far as quarterbacks and running backs go. Tomorrow, we'll look at receivers, we'll look at scrimmage yards, and we'll look at some team stats as well. And we will take a look at the Thursday night game, see how that panned out, see if anybody put up any top 10 numbers. All right, appreciate you listening. And if you want to, like I said, you can see this podcast on YouTube at Just the Stats NFL, where you can see all the charts I'm putting up, as well as just hearing what's being said. You can also just listen to it, though, on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, whatever podcast app you might use. You can contact me by email at justthestatsnfl@gmail.com. Again, thanks for listening. Please like and subscribe. Subscribers are great. Just hit that button. I'd appreciate it. And if you want to leave me a comment, great. I'll read it and try to comment back if possible. All right. So until next time, that is a wrap for NFL Top 10s for Thursday. I'm out.